Weathering the Storm in Ersama, by Hirschmander. Here is an outline to the story. The cyclone that hit Ersama in October 1999 killed thousands of people, and devastated hundreds of villages. For 2 dreadful nights, Prashant, a young man, was marooned on the roof of a house. On the 3rd day, he decided to go to his village. Did he find his family? Let us read and figure out. On 27 October 1999, 7 years after his mother's death, Prashant had gone to the block headquarters of Ersama, a small town in coastal Orissa, some 18 kilometers from his village, to spend the day with a friend. In the evening, a dark and menacing storm quickly gathered. Winds beat against the houses, with a speed and fury that Prashant had never witnessed before. Heavy and incessant rain filled the darkness, ancient trees were uprooted and crashed to the earth. Screams rent the air as people and houses were swiftly washed away. The angry waters swirled into his friend's house, neck-deep. The building was of brick and mortar, and was strong enough to survive the devastation of the wind's velocity of 350 km/h. But the cold terror of the family grew, with the crashing of trees that had got uprooted and fallen on their house, sometime in the middle of the night, damaging its roof and walls. The crazed destruction, wrought by the cyclone, and the surge of the ocean continued for the next 36 hours, although wind speeds had reduced somewhat by the next morning. To escape the waters rising in the house, Prashant and his friend's family had taken refuge on the roof. Prashant will never forget the shock he experienced at his first glimpse of the devastation wrought by the super cyclone, in the grey light of the early morning. A raging, deadly, brown sheet of water covered everything as far as the eye could see. Only fractured cement houses still stood in a few places. Bloated animal carcasses and human corpses floated in every direction. All round, even huge old trees had fallen. 2 coconut trees had fallen on the roof of their house. This was a blessing in disguise, because the tender coconuts from the trees kept the trapped family from starving in the several days that followed. For the next 2 days, Prashant sat huddled with his friend's family in the open on the rooftop. They froze in the cold and incessant rain. The rainwater washed away Prashant's tears. The only thought that flashed through his mind was whether his family had survived the fury of the super cyclone. Was he to be bereaved once again? 2 days later, which seemed to Prashant like 2 years, the rain ceased and the rainwaters slowly began to recede. Prashant was determined to seek out his family without further delay. But the situation was still dangerous, and his friend's family pleaded with Prashant to stay back a little while longer. But Prashant knew he had to go. He equipped himself with a long, sturdy stick, and then started on his 18-kilometer expedition back to his village through the swollen flood waters. It was a journey he would never forget. He constantly had to use his stick to locate the road, to determine where the water was most shallow. At places it was waist-deep, and progress was slow. At several points, he lost the road and had to swim. After some distance, he was relieved to find 2 friends of his uncle who were also returning to their village. They decided to move ahead together. As they waded through the waters, the scenes they witnessed grew more and more macabre. They had to push away many human bodies, men, women, children, and carcasses of dogs, goats and cattle that the current swept against them as they moved ahead. In every village that they passed, they could barely see a house standing. Prashant now wept out loud and long. He was sure that his family could not have survived this catastrophe. Eventually, Prashant reached his village, Kalakuda. His heart went cold. Where their home once stood, there were only remnants of its roof. Some of their belongings were caught, mangled and twisted in the branches of trees just visible above the dark waters. Young Prashant decided to go to the Red Cross shelter to look for his family. Among the first people he saw in the crowd was his maternal grandmother. Weak with hunger, she rushed to him, her hands outstretched, her eyes brimming. It was a miracle. They had long given him up for dead. Quickly word spread and his extended family gathered around him, and hugged him tight in relief. Prashant anxiously scanned the motley, battered group. His brother and sister, his uncles and aunts, they all seemed to be there. By the next morning, as he took in the desperate situation in the shelter, he decided to get a grip over himself. He sensed a deathly grief settling upon the 2,500-strong crowd in the shelter. 86 lives were lost in the village. All the 96 houses had been washed away. It was their 4th day at the shelter. So far they had survived on green coconuts, but there were too few to go around such a tumult of people. Prashant, all of 19 years, decided to step in as leader of his village, if no one else did. He organized a group of youths and elders to jointly pressurize the merchant once again to part with his rice. This time the delegation succeeded and returned triumphantly, wading through the receding waters with food for the entire shelter. No one cared that the rice was already rotting. Branches from fallen trees were gathered to light a reluctant and slow fire, on which to cook the rice. For the first time in 4 days, the survivors at the cyclone shelter were able to fill their bellies. His next task was to organize a team of youth volunteers to clean the shelter of filth, urine, vomit and floating carcasses, and to tend to the wounds and fractures of the many who had been injured. On the 5th day, a military helicopter flew over the shelter and dropped some food parcels. It then did not return. The youth task force gathered empty utensils from the shelter. Then they deputed the children to lie in the sand left by the waters around the shelter with these utensils on their stomachs, to communicate to the passing helicopters that they were hungry. The message got through, and after that the helicopter made regular rounds of the shelter, airdropping food and other basic needs. Prashant found that a large number of children had been orphaned. He brought them together and put up a polythene sheet shelter for them. Women were mobilized to look after them, while the men secured food and materials for the shelter. As the weeks passed, Prashant was quick to recognize that the women and children were sinking deeper and deeper in the grief. He persuaded the women to start working in the Food for Work program started by an NGO, and for the children he organized sports events. He himself loved to play cricket, and so he organized cricket matches for children. Prashant engaged, with other volunteers, in helping the widows and children to pick up the broken pieces of their lives. The initial government plan was to set up institutions for orphans and widows. However, this step was successfully resisted, as it was felt that in such institutions, children would grow up without love, and widows would suffer from stigma and loneliness. Prashant's group believed orphans should be resettled in their own community itself, possibly in new foster families made up of childless widows and children without adult care. It is 6 months after the devastation of the super cyclone. This time Prashant's wounded spirit has healed simply because he had no time to bother about his own pain. His handsome, youthful face is what the widows and orphan children of his village seek out most in the darkest hour of grief. Hope you could understand, and enjoy the story. Thanks for watching. Please continue with the glossary, and the comprehension part.
The Last Leaf, an evergreen classic, by O. Henry. Here is an outline to this beautiful story. It is autumn. The wind is blowing hard and it is raining heavily. All the leaves on an ivy creeper have fallen, except one. Why doesn't the last leaf fall? Let us read the story and figure out. Sue and Johnsy, 2 young artists, shared a small flat. The flat was on the 3rd story of an old house. Johnsy fell very seriously ill in November. She had pneumonia. She would lie in her bed without moving, just gazing out of the window. Sue, her friend, became very worried. She sent for the doctor. Although he came every day, there was no change in Johnsy's condition. One day the doctor took Sue aside and asked her, "Is anything worrying Johnsy?" "No," replied Sue. "But why do you ask?" The doctor said, "Johnsy, it seems, has made up her mind that she is not going to get well. If she doesn't want to live, medicines will not help her." Sue tried her best to make Johnsy take an interest in things around her. She talked about clothes and fashions, but Johnsy did not respond. Johnsy continued to lie still on her bed. Sue brought her drawing board into Johnsy's room and started painting. To take Johnsy's mind off her illness, she whistled while working. Suddenly Sue heard Johnsy whisper something. She quickly rushed to the bed and heard Johnsy counting backwards. She was looking out of the window and was saying, 12. After some time she whispered, 11, then 10, then 9, 8, 7. Sue anxiously looked out of the window. She saw an old ivy creeper climbing halfway up the brick wall opposite their window. In the strong wind outside, the creeper was shedding its leaves. "What is it, dear?" Sue asked. 6, whispered Johnsy. "They are falling faster now. 3 days ago there were almost 100 leaves. There are only 5 left now." "It is autumn," said Sue, "and the leaves will fall." "When the last leaf falls, I will die," said Johnsy with finality. "I have known this for the last 3 days." "Oh, that's nonsense," replied Sue. "What have old ivy leaves to do with your getting well? The doctor is confident that you will get better." Johnsy did not say anything. Sue went and brought her a bowl of soup. "I don't want any soup," said Johnsy. "I am not hungry. Now there are only 4 leaves left. I want to see the last one fall before it gets dark. Then I will sleep forever." Sue sat on Johnsy's bed, kissed her and said, "You are not going to die. I can't draw the curtain for I need the light. I want to finish the painting and get some money for us. Please, my dear friend," she begged Johnsy, "promise not to look out of the window while I paint." "All right," said Johnsy. "Finish your painting soon for I want to see the last leaf fall. I'm tired of waiting. I have to die, so let me go away peacefully like one of those poor, tired leaves." "Try to sleep," said Sue. "I have to paint an old miner. I will call Behrman up to be my model." Sue rushed down. Behrman lived on the ground floor. He was a 60-year-old painter. His lifelong dream was to paint a masterpiece, but that had remained a dream. Sue poured out her worries to Behrman. She told him how Johnsy was convinced that she would die when the last leaf fell. "Is she stupid?" asked Behrman. "How can she be so foolish? She is running a high temperature," complained Sue. "She refuses to eat or drink, and that worries me a lot." "I will come with you and see Johnsy," Behrman said. They tiptoed into the room. Johnsy was sleeping. Sue drew the curtains together and they went to the next room. She peeped out through the window. There was only one leaf on the creeper. It was raining heavily and an icy cold wind was blowing. It seemed as though the leaf would fall any minute now. Behrman did not say a word. He went back to his room. Johnsy woke up next morning. In a feeble voice she asked Sue to draw the curtains. Sue was nervous. She drew back the curtains very reluctantly. "Oh!" Sue exclaimed as she looked at the vine creeper. "Look, there is still one leaf on the creeper. It looks quite green and healthy. In spite of the storm and the fierce winds, it didn't fall." "I heard the wind last night," said Johnsy. "I thought it would have fallen. It will surely fall today. Then I'll die." "You won't die," said Sue energetically. "You have to live for your friends. What would happen to me if you die?" Johnsy smiled weakly and closed her eyes. After every hour or so she would look out of the window and find the leaf still there. It seemed to be clinging to the creeper. In the evening, there was another storm but the leaf did not fall. Johnsy lay for a long time looking at the leaf. Then she called out to Sue. "I have been a bad girl. You have looked after me so lovingly and I have not cooperated with you. I have been depressed and gloomy. The last leaf has shown me how wicked I have been. I have realized that it is a sin to want to die." Sue hugged Johnsy. Then she gave her lots of hot soup and a mirror. Johnsy combed her hair and smiled brightly. In the afternoon the doctor came. After examining his patient he told Sue, "Johnsy now has the will to live. I am confident she'll recover soon. Now I must go downstairs and see Behrman. He is also suffering from pneumonia. But I am afraid, there is no hope for him." The next morning Sue came and sat on Johnsy's bed. Taking Johnsy's hand in hers she said, "I have something to tell you. Mr. Behrman died of pneumonia this morning. He was ill for only 2 days. The first day the janitor found him on his bed. His clothes and shoes were wet and he was shivering. He had been out in that stormy night. Then they found a ladder and a lantern still lighted lying near his bed. There were also some brushes and green and yellow paints on the floor near the ladder." "Johnsy dear," said Sue, "look out of the window. Look at that ivy leaf. Haven't you wondered why it doesn't flutter when the wind blows? That's Behrman's masterpiece. He painted it the night the last leaf fell. Hope you could understand and enjoy the story. Please continue with the comprehension part. Thanks for watching. Kindly take a moment, like, share, and subscribe."
A House is Not a Home, by Zan Gordioso. This story reflects the challenges of being a teenager, and the problems of growing up. How does the author overcome his problems? Let us read, understand, and figure out. My first year of high school felt awkward. After leaving junior high at the head of my class with all the seniority the upper grade levels could afford me, it felt strange starting over as a freshman. The school was twice as big as my old school, and to make matters worse, my closest friends were sent to a different high school. I felt very isolated. I missed my old teachers so much that I would go back and visit them. They would encourage me to get involved in school activities so that I could meet new people. They told me that in time I would adjust and probably end up loving my new school more than I had my old one. They made me promise that when that happened I would still come by and visit them from time to time. I understood the psychology in what they were saying, but I took some comfort in it nonetheless. One Sunday afternoon, not long after I had started high school, I was sitting at home at our dining room table doing homework. It was a cold and windy fall day, and we had a fire going in our fireplace. As usual, my red tabby cat was lying on top of all my papers, purring loudly and occasionally swatting at my pen for entertainment's sake. She was never far from me. I had rescued her when she was a kitten, and somehow she knew that I was the one responsible for giving her the good life. My mother kept stoking the fire to keep the house nice and warm. Suddenly, I smelled something strange, and then I noticed it. Smoke pouring in through the seams of the ceiling. The smoke began to fill the room so quickly that we could barely see. Groping our way to the front door, we all ran out into the front yard. By the time we made our way outside, the whole roof was engulfed in flames and it was spreading quickly. I ran to the neighbors to call the fire department, while I watched my mother run back into the house. My mother then ran out of the house carrying a small metal box full of important documents. She dropped the case on the lawn and, in a crazed state, ran back into the house. I knew what she was after. My father had died when I was young, and I was certain that she was not going to let his pictures and letters go up in flames. They were the only things that she had to remember him by. Still, I screamed at her, "Mom! No!" I was about to run after her when I felt a large hand hold me back. It was a fireman. I hadn't even noticed that the street had already filled with fire trucks. I was trying to free myself from his grasp, yelling, "You don't understand, my mother's in there." He held on to me while other firefighters ran into the house. He knew that I wasn't acting very logically and that if he were to let go, I'd run. He was right. "It's all right, they'll get her," he said. He wrapped a blanket around me and sat me down in our car. Soon after that, a fireman emerged from our house with my mom in tow. He quickly took her over to the truck and put an oxygen mask on her. I ran over and hugged her. All those times I ever argued with her and hated her vanished at the thought of losing her. "She's going to be okay," said the fireman. "She just inhaled a little smoke." And then he ran back to fight the fire while my mother and I sat there dazed. I remember watching my house burn down and thinking that there was nothing I could do about it. 5 hours later, the fire was finally out. Our house was almost completely burned down. But then it struck me, I hadn't seen my cat. Where was my cat? Much to my horror, I realized that she was nowhere to be found. Then all at once it hit me, the new school, the fire, my cat. I broke down in tears and cried and cried. I was suffering loss, big time. The firemen wouldn't let us go back into the house that night. It was still too dangerous. Dead or alive, I couldn't imagine leaving without knowing about my cat. Regardless, I had to go. We piled into the car with just the clothes on our backs and a few of the firemen's blankets, and made our way to my grandparents' house to spend the night. The next day, Monday, I went to school. When the fire broke out, I was still wearing the dress I had worn to church that morning, but I had no shoes. I had kicked them off when I was doing my homework. They became yet another casualty of the fire. So I had to borrow some tennis shoes from my aunt. Why couldn't I just stay home from school? My mother wouldn't hear of it, but I was totally embarrassed by everything. The clothes I was wearing looked weird, I had no books or homework, and my backpack was gone. I had my life in that backpack. The more I tried to fit in, the worse it got. Was I destined to be an outcast and a geek all my life? That's what it felt like. I didn't want to grow up, change, or have to handle life if it was going to be this way. I just wanted to curl up and die. I walked around school like a zombie. Everything felt surreal, and I wasn't sure what was going to happen. All the security I had known, from my old school, my friends, my house and my cat, had all been ripped away. When I walked through what used to be my house after school that day, I was shocked to see how much damage there was. Whatever hadn't burned was destroyed by the water and chemicals they had used to put out the fire. The only material things not destroyed were the photo albums, documents and some other personal items that my mother had managed to heroically rescue. But my cat was gone and my heart ached for her. There was no time to grieve. My mother rushed me out of the house. We would have to find a place to live, and I would have to go buy some clothes for school. We had to borrow money from my grandparents because there were no credit cards, cash, or even any identification to be able to withdraw money from the bank. Everything had gone up in smoke. That week the rubble that used to be our house was being cleared off the lot. Even though we had rented an apartment nearby, I would go over to watch them clear away debris, hoping that my cat was somewhere to be found. She was gone. I kept thinking about her as that vulnerable little kitten. In the early morning when I would disturb her and get out of bed, she would tag along after me, climb up my robe and crawl into my pocket to fall asleep. I was missing her terribly. It always seems that bad news spreads quickly, and in my case it was no different. Everyone in high school, including the teachers, was aware of my plight. I was embarrassed as if somehow I were responsible. What a way to start off at a new school. This was not the kind of attention I was looking for. The next day at school, people were acting even more strange than usual. I was getting ready for gym class at my locker. People were milling around me, asking me to hurry up. I thought it strange, but in the light of the past few weeks, nothing would surprise me. It almost seemed that they were trying to shove me into the gym, then I saw why. There was a big table set up with all kinds of stuff on it, just for me. They had taken up a collection and bought me school supplies, notebooks, all kinds of different clothes, jeans, tops, sweatsuits. It was like Christmas. I was overcome by emotion. People who had never spoken to me before were coming up to me to introduce themselves. I got all kinds of invitations to their houses. The genuine outpouring of concern really touched me. In that instant, I finally breathed a sigh of relief and thought for the first time that things were going to be okay. I made friends that day. A month later, I was at my house watching them rebuild it. But this time it was different. I wasn't alone. I was with two of my new friends from school. It took a fire for me to stop focusing on my feelings of insecurity and open up to all the wonderful people around me. Now I was sitting there watching my house being rebuilt when I realized my life was doing the same thing. While we sat there on the curb, planning my new bedroom, I heard someone walk up to me from behind and say, "Does this belong to you?" When I turned around to see who it was, I couldn't believe my eyes. A woman was standing there holding my cat. I leapt up and grabbed her out of the woman's arms. I held her close to me and cried into that beautiful orange fur. She purred happily. My friends were hugging me, hugging the cat and jumping around. Apparently, my cat had been so freaked by the fire that she ran over a mile away. Her collar had our phone number on it, but our phones had been destroyed and disconnected. This wonderful woman took her in and worked hard to find out whose cat it was. Somehow, she knew this cat was loved and sorely missed. As I sat there with my friends and my cat curled up in my lap, all the overwhelming feelings of loss and tragedy seemed to diminish. I felt gratitude for my life, my new friends, the kindness of a stranger and the loud purr of my beloved cat. My cat was back and so was I. Hope you could enjoy and understand the story. Please continue with the glossary and the comprehension part. Kindly take a moment, like, share, and subscribe.
The Beggar, by Anton Chekhov. Lushkov is a beggar. Sergei the advocate happens to meet him and demanding him to work and earn his daily bread. How this induced the beggar, Lushkov, to change his ways. Let's read, understand and figure out. Kind sir, have pity, turn your attention to a poor, hungry man. For 3 days I have had nothing to eat, I haven't 5 kopecks for a lodging, I swear it before God. For 8 years I was a village schoolteacher and then I lost my place through intrigues. I fell a victim to calumny. It is a year now since I have had anything to do. The advocate, Sergei, looked at the ragged, fawn-colored overcoat of the suppliant, at his dull, drunken eyes, at the red spot on either cheek, and it seemed to him as if he had seen this man somewhere before. I have now had an offer of a position in the province of Kaluga, the mendicant went on, but I haven't the money to get there. Help me kindly, I am ashamed to ask, but I am obliged to by circumstances. Sergei's eyes fell on the man's overshoes, one of which was high and the other low, and he suddenly remembered something. Look here, it seems to me I met you the day before yesterday in Sadovya Street, he said, but you told me then that you were a student who had been expelled, and not a village schoolteacher. Do you remember? No, that can't be so, mumbled the beggar, taken aback. I am a village schoolteacher, and if you like I can show you my papers. Have done with lying. You called yourself a student and even told me what you had been expelled for. Don't you remember? Sergei flushed and turned from the ragged creature with an expression of disgust. This is dishonesty, my dear sir, he cried angrily. This is swindling, I shall send the police for you, damn you. Sir, he said, laying his hand on his heart, the fact is I was lying. I am neither a student nor a schoolteacher. All that was fiction. Formerly I sang in a Russian choir and was sent away for drunkenness. But what else can I do? I can't get along without lying. No one will give me anything when I tell the truth. What can I do? What can you do? You ask what you can do, cried Sergei, coming close to him. Work. That's what you can do. You must work. Work, yes. I know that myself, but where can I find work? How would you like to chop wood for me? I wouldn't refuse to do that, but in these days even skilled woodcutters find themselves sitting without bread. Will you come and chop wood for me? Yes, sir, I will. Very well, we'll soon find out. Sergei hastened along, rubbing his hands. He called his cook out of the kitchen. "Here, Olga," he said, "take this gentleman into the woodshed and let him chop wood." The scarecrow of a beggar shrugged his shoulders, as if in perplexity, and went irresolutely after the cook. It was obvious from his gait that he had not consented to go and chop wood because he was hungry and wanted work, but simply from pride and shame and because he had been trapped by his own words. It was obvious, too, that his strength had been undermined by vodka and that he was unhealthy and did not feel the slightest inclination for toil. Sergei hurried into the dining room. From its windows one could see the woodshed and everything that went on in the yard. Standing at the window, Sergei saw the cook and the beggar come out into the yard by the back door and make their way across the dirty snow to the shed. Olga glared wrathfully at her companion, shoved him aside with her elbow, unlocked the shed, and angrily banged the door. Next he saw the pseudo-teacher seat himself on a log and become lost in thought with his red cheeks resting on his fists. The woman flung down an axe at his feet, spat angrily, and, judging from the expression of her lips, began to scold him. The beggar irresolutely pulled a billet of wood towards him, set it up between his feet, and tapped it feebly with the axe. The billet wavered and fell down. The beggar again pulled it to him, blew on his freezing hands, and tapped it with his axe cautiously, as if afraid of hitting his overshoe or of cutting off his finger. The stick of wood again fell to the ground. Sergei's anger had vanished and he now began to feel a little sorry and ashamed of himself for having set a spoiled, drunken, perhaps sick man to work at menial labor in the cold. An hour later Olga came in and announced that the wood had all been chopped. "Good. Give him half a ruble," said Sergei. "If he wants to he can come back and cut wood on the first day of each month. We can always find work for him." On the first of the month the waif made his appearance and again earned half a ruble, although he could barely stand on his legs. From that day on he often appeared in the yard and every time work was found for him. Now he would shovel snow, now put the woodshed in order, now beat the dust out of rugs and mattresses. Every time he received from 20 to 40 kopecks, and once, even a pair of old trousers were sent out to him. When Sergei moved into another house he hired him to help in the packing and hauling of the furniture. This time the waif was sober, gloomy, and silent. He hardly touched the furniture, and walked behind the wagons hanging his head, not even making a pretense of appearing busy. He only shivered in the cold and became embarrassed when the carters jeered at him for his idleness, his feebleness, and his tattered, fancy overcoat. After the moving was over Sergei sent for him. "Well, I am happy that my words have taken effect," he said, handing him a ruble. "Here's for your pains. I see you are sober and have no objection to work. What is your name?" "Lushkov." "Well, Lushkov, I can now offer you some other, cleaner employment." "Can you write?" "I can." "Then take this letter to a friend of mine tomorrow and you will be given some copying to do. Work hard, don't drink, and remember what I have said to you. Goodbye." Pleased at having put a man on the right path, Sergei tapped Lushkov kindly on the shoulder and even gave him his hand at parting. Lushkov took the letter, and from that day forth came no more to the yard for work. 2 years went by. Then one evening, as Sergei was standing at the ticket window of a theater paying for his seat, he noticed a little man beside him with a coat collar of curly fur and a worn sealskin cap. This little individual timidly asked the ticket seller for a seat in the gallery and paid for it in copper coins. "Lushkov, is that you?" cried Sergei, recognizing in the little man his former woodchopper. "How are you? What are you doing? How is everything with you?" All right. I am a notary now and am paid 35 rubles a month. Thank heaven. That's fine. I am delighted for your sake. I am very, very glad, Lushkov. You see, you are my godson, in a sense. I gave you a push along the right path, you know. Do you remember what a roasting I gave you, eh? I nearly had you sinking into the ground at my feet that day. Thank you, old man, for not forgetting my words. Thank you, too, said Lushkov. If I hadn't come to you then I might still have been calling myself a teacher or a student to this day. Yes, by flying to your protection I dragged myself out of a pit. I am very glad, indeed. Thank you for your kind words and deeds. I am very grateful to you and to your cook. God bless that good and noble woman. You spoke finely then, and I shall be indebted to you to my dying day, but, strictly speaking, it was your cook, Olga, who saved me. How is that? When I used to come to your house to chop wood she used to begin, "Oh, you sot, you. Oh, you miserable creature. There's nothing for you but ruin." And then she would sit down opposite me and grow sad, look into my face and weep. "Oh, you unlucky man. There is no pleasure for you in this world and there will be none in the world to come. You drunkard. You will burn in hell. Oh, you unhappy one." And so she would carry on, you know, in that strain. I can't tell you how much misery she suffered, how many tears she shed for my sake. But the chief thing was, she used to chop the wood for me. Do you know, sir, that I did not chop one single stick of wood for you? She did it all. Why this saved me, why I changed, why I stopped drinking at the sight of her I cannot explain. I only know that, owing to her words and noble deeds, a change took place in my heart, she set me right and I shall never forget it. However, it is time to go now, there goes the bell. Lushkov bowed and departed to the gallery. Hope you could understand and enjoy the story. Thanks for watching. Please continue with the glossary and the comprehension part. Kindly take a moment, like, share, and subscribe. Thank you.